everyone. I'm Sharon Malloch. Thanks for joining me today for another Expert Insights. I am joined by Jamie Harris, an expert at MHC with more than 27 years helping enterprises and regulated organizations solve their customer communication challenges. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Sharon. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really excited about the topic.
All right, well, this is going to be very interesting based on your experience. I know all kinds of organizations across all kinds of industries have document generation capabilities embedded inside their software platforms, their workflows, their business processes. So today I want to talk about the challenges these technical teams face, especially when that platform needs to grow to support the business. So Jamie, let's just start at the beginning. I am sure most teams managing a software platform don't set out to build full document generation infrastructure from the start. I suspect it usually starts small with the software needing to produce a report or a contract or some other sort of customer facing document. So maybe you can start by walking us through this and describing how document generation typically starts within a software platform.
Well, that's an excellent point, Sharon. What I found is that this does typically start off in a slow manner or in a very gradual process, because what happens is a customer has a need, whether that's a new document, a new communication, report, statement, whatever that they need and they ask for. And so the team, understanding the sense of urgency to get that result for that client out the door, they use what they can. They use whatever they have. Maybe it's existing tools like Microsoft Office. Maybe it's SharePoint or legacy platforms, or maybe they write custom code. Maybe they use open source libraries or things like that. Whatever they can do to meet the need in the required timeline. So they do that. And for that first version, that works well enough. And it does get the job done and all is good. But then what happens is another customer asks for something that's just slightly different. Then the scope begins to creep and expand.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to do change management. They have to do things with the initial implementation and try to make it meet the new requirements. So then a product team starts to try and add those variations. And over time, that just becomes more and more complex. The document logic, the data, the templates, the formatting, the auditability, and all of those things, that becomes more and more complex. So little thought is typically given to those requirements as they're being done in real time. They're kind of unspoken or even not written down. And there's rarely conversations between different teams or different groups about things within their operational processes. Things like scalability and accessibility and connectivity all creep in to that process of creating that communication, and the team is forced to meet those needs. So when it started as let's generate one document now becomes a core part of that customer experience. And at that point, document generation is no longer just an output, just a meeting one need. It's become part of the platform's infrastructure.
Right. They start from a very practical place, but eventually what worked for them at first can start to create friction. And you described some of that as the platform grows, but maybe we can dig a little deeper into the pain points and the friction that actually takes place.
That's absolutely correct. The friction starts as the implementation becomes more complex because more people become involved, more groups become involved, and it becomes part of this platform as we talked about. And at first, those requirements are simple and they're linear and it's maybe a one-time limited need. Then it becomes many customers, many rules, many templates, many exceptions. And the same process that once worked, that once met the need, now is slowing the team down. So what happens is it's rarely one major failure. This happens, maybe the term would be a death by 1,000 paper cuts, because a template change just happens one, maybe the next and the next. Mm-hmm. And over time, that becomes almost impossible to manage, or it becomes very complex to manage. And the customer needs a variation that the system was not designed to support. Data will come from different places, and it doesn't map cleanly. Data changes are one of the most complex things that happen in communication management and document management. Systems will catastrophically fail if data is off by even one character, depending on how it's structured. Product or information teams need engineering help to just make routine changes. Ownership issues arise. Who owns this? Who's supposed to make these changes? Who's supposed to
Mm-hmm.
test this? Who's supposed to manage quality control? And it becomes a manual process, and testing becomes very time consuming and very hard to maintain. Version control becomes messy or even non existent.
Mm-hmm.
Customer specific logic becomes buried in the code. The team realizes that the document generation is no longer a small feature. It affects delivery, support, and most importantly, the customer experience. So this all changes everything.
Right. So the impact is grows gradually, but it spreads throughout the whole organization to really impact everyone. Um, when you think about software teams, um, what are they to do? I mean, they're comfortable building, right? They have this as part of their DNA. They're used to saying, I can build that, we can build that. So, how should these teams decide? Like, at what point should they say, document generation is really something that they shouldn't build internally? Perhaps it's becomes an important infrastructure that needs to be managed more deliberately. What would your insights be to that point?
Well, I think what you said is very insightful because that is exactly what happens. These are people who make a living and have been doing this all a long time of creating things to solve problems. So technical teams can certainly build a document generation platform. They can build something that works for a set of requirements. The problem becomes when that scope gets out of control and it starts to become not just a side thing that they're doing, it becomes a core thing that they have to manage. And are they really designed or set up to manage that core process of generating these communications, particularly when they become high volume and very high in variability? The challenge is whether they can manage this long term. Can they manage the change management, the high volume things, the integration with things like if it's for mail, for the postal components, or if it's for digital delivery, how do they manage that? Because those things tend to be silos within organizations. So you may have one team that handles emails, for instance, one team that handles print, and they don't think the same way and they don't do things the same way. But these components, these communications all come from the same source, and they have to take all of that into consideration. So building the first version is very different than maintaining hundreds of versions, and in some cases, thousands of versions. The product team has to consider how they can handle scale, performance, data variability, very important, workflow, approvals. Accessibility is a really common topic that comes up a lot now, and that's very important. We have to meet those requirements and those needs that our customers have that maybe are visually impaired. Auditability, all of those types of customer specific needs have to be managed. Teams may spend valuable engineering time maintaining this, what's now become a platform inside of their system. And they have to ask themselves, is this a core competency for us? Is this the best use of our time? So in the long run, that may not indeed be the case. And they may need to look at something that's engineered and created to manage exactly this type of problem within a company around customer communications.
Right. Yeah. And I think you've described how this process evolves. And I want to talk about something, to help teams identify when they're reaching this point. Let's talk about the scaling wall. So a company might have an approach, as you say, that works for 10 customers or 50 customers or one product line, but then growth exposes the limits. And it usually starts to break when a software platform tries to scale document generation. So maybe like just talk about that scaling wall, and maybe the things that they could relate to and identify that shows which stage they're at.
So if you think about this uh, like something that's outside of customer communications, you decide you're going to plant a garden or you're going to do something like that. What may have started as 1 tomato plant becomes 10 different kind of plants, and you're trying to manage soil capabilities and all those things for those plants, it becomes more complex very quickly, and it's exponential in the way that it does that. So as you add more customers, you create more variations. As you add more verticals, maybe it's a different type of customer, that will create more requirements. Once you have to integrate with other systems of record within your organization, that creates significant complexity. Do I need to go get this customer's data from this place or from this place? Do I need to update data in this place or this place? You have all of these interactivities that happen. So as you begin to add more output channels, maybe one's print, maybe one's digital, maybe one's for an archive, or it's text or anything else, how do you manage that complexity? More users create more expectations around self-service changes. Mm-hmm. What if you have business owners or people who want to make changes or they want to update their data? How do you manage that? So you have compliance requirements that come into play, not just compliance requirements today, what's coming down the road. So all of these things change. It's a moving target, and you have to stay on top of all of that. What happens when the software system that you're using doesn't keep up with something else? Say you're using legacy stuff and it's just no longer following the rules, the compliance regulations that you have to follow. As you add more volume, once you get into certain volume levels, it becomes a really significant operational issue to manage that and to keep reliability and compliance and accuracy and all of those things in mind. As you do them, you have to maintain that. So the more customer-facing communications that you have create more risk that something's going to go wrong. If you're relying on manual review or custom work or engineering tickets to keep up, then you're already behind. You already have a significant issue. That slows implementations. It slows the ability to improve or upgrade your technologies, your product that you're using, and it delays customer requests, and it makes the platform harder to scale. So the system that worked at one stage at the beginning no longer works as you get to the next stage or the next stage because it's just too big. We have companies like 2Com and Procore that are software businesses that both show how important document generation can become to their technology. So they've created a scenario where they need document generation or communication creation inside of their platform, and it's become very, very complex and high volume. They may have tens or hundreds or thousands of calls. Maybe it's an API call or an integration to some other system, all for each run that they do. So it's very complex. The broader lesson's not really about a single customer story. It's about recognizing when document generation has become infrastructure within your organization.
Right. Yeah, I like the way you describe it also as being exponential. So that scaling wall, it's not just linear, it's exponential. And that really drives home the lesson of, man, this can really have an impact and very quickly if it's not managed. And I know that one thing we discussed earlier is, we've talked about how this impacts product teams and the IT team, but because it's usually not felt immediately at the executive level. It's the people closest to the pain, perhaps product managers, implementation teams. Maybe you can just tell us a bit more about who those people are who initially recognize the pain and why they recognize it before anyone else does.
That's interesting because basically we have a lot of industries that utilize technology to do what we're talking about today, do customer communications management. And it's different for different organizations, but common elements are things like product managers. A product manager is going to quickly know that the customer experience is degraded, that there are things they want to do that they can't do, and they're being limited not by their product's capabilities, but by infrastructure things like customer communication management and creating documents. And they can see how that's limiting what they can do. So that's a place where that happens. Support is one of the first places to see a pain. I promise you, customers will call, and they will call support and tell you, well, I don't understand this or whatever it is. So they will see this first. Implementation teams will see it because when they go to implement let's say you have a new customer, maybe it's more complex. Maybe it's harder to do. Maybe it's harder to meet the requirements of the customer that you've just signed. The professional services team may be seeing things like repeated requests for the same thing. Mm-hmm. We need help, or we need help staying up to date with the technology or with compliance issues or whatever that is. So the support teams will hear it, and the professional services teams will hear it, and then you may even have a compliance team there. That would be a bad case. So now, if your compliance manager or compliance orchestrator is beginning to hear problems about something not meeting a compliance requirement, then you're already kind of past the point of no return, and you need to figure out how to get that resolved. And then these teams, they just know that there's a current approach. What it's doing is it's slowing them down. And so you have people like CTOs and CIOs or COOs, they'll see it when it gets to a break point.
Mm-hmm.
But these other people will see it long before that. And that's when you need to take steps. So if these documents are wrong or late or confusing or hard to update, or the customer doesn't see anything, they don't see what the problem is. They just see they have a problem, that their customer experience has been diminished by whatever is happening in this back end of the infrastructure.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned earlier, open source libraries, custom code. They could be using a mix of various internal tools to handle document generation. And as you said, it can work for a while. But how would you talk about the limitations of that approach, specifically for regulated customers? Because I think that ups the ante, so to speak. How would you talk about it without making it sound like open source or custom code is the problem?
Right, so you have a situation where people are trying to solve a problem. So open source is not the enemy. Custom code is not always wrong. These tools help them solve problems in real time. That's what they're doing. So it's not the time to I say slap someone's wrist for doing what they needed to do to meet a customer need.
Mm-hmm.
The problem becomes it's hard to maintain. It's hard to manage. As you're created this patchwork approach, these different pieces that work to do the things that you do, you've done it for really good reasons, and it was the fastest way to get it done at that stage of the game. But now it's become part of what your customers are expecting in their customer experience. So you can't maintain it. You can't document it. You can't scale it. So you have to figure out a better way. So ultimately, if you don't have anyone who can see this at a higher level, an overall view of all of the templates, all of the rules, all the versions, all the data, all the approval steps, in a regulated industry, those are important things. You need to have a commonality, or at least someone that has a common exposure to all of those things so that they can maintain the company's risk as it applies to compliance. So the greater these communications, the bigger and more complex or more higher volume they become, the more likely you are to be out of compliance, or you need more controls for data governance and those types of things. What's important to remember is that approval workflows matter. Auditability matters. Accessibility matters. Version control matters, and data governance matters. A document is no longer just a document. It's not an output. It's an evidence of what's been communicated. And using the word evidence, it's a legal document or a legal communication that you have to be aware of, and you have to follow the rules. The same scaling issues exist in non-regulated industries. The conversation should be about really how mature is your system. Once you get to a certain place, you need to make sure that you're managing all of these components equally, and that you're taking care of all the things that you're required to take care of in your business. Again, it's not a time to point fingers. It's a time to just make the system meet the needs, to improve the system, and to mature it as a whole. And that's where a system that maybe is core processes doing customer communications is a better path than doing a homemade version.
Right. Absolutely. You just come to a point where you just need to move beyond what you're doing to meet the business need. So let's talk more about the solution side of this conversation, of this equation. When a software team moves from a patchwork or custom built approach to something purpose built, what are the biggest changes that they would see taking place?
Well, I would say the biggest changes are that everything becomes more centralized. So the templates and the logic become centralized. Change management is centralized. You might be able to give business users the ability to manage and update certain content changes without requiring engineering to get involved. Mm-hmm. The platform can support more variation without creating more manual work. Engineering teams can focus on what their expertise is within your core product needs and your core product capabilities, instead of maintaining something that's not something that's a core capability for them. The company just gets more control and consistency and scalability. All of those things make for a much better internal infrastructure and platform capability, as well as a better customer experience.
Okay, that's an excellent list of things that people can look for in their own environment. And maybe for companies listening to this who are part of a product team, maybe pick a couple of warning signs that you might have outgrown your current document generation approach. We'll just summarize it.
Okay. I think if every template requires engineering to be involved, if you make a change in a template, that's a warning sign. If unexpected failures keep popping up just because maybe the data changed or something else changed, that's a really important warning sign. Mm-hmm. If the product teams are saying no or not yet, if you're having to say no to your customers, right, because it's going to break something in the infrastructure, that's a warning sign. There's a lot of warning signs, and there's a lot of things that if you're doing things manually all the time, you probably need to start looking at what you're doing. If testing and auditing and quality control and approvals are all manual, you just need to look at that.
Okay, well, this is a great place to end. What I've heard today is that document generation often starts as a practical product need. A team solves a problem, supports a customer, builds what they need at the time. But then as the needs grow and the platform grows, document generation becomes a much bigger infrastructure question. And if companies can recognize early on that they can reduce complexity, improve scalability, give their product and technical teams a stronger foundation for growth, then that's what they need to do.
Just one last point. I want to say that if you're waiting until everything falls apart to recognize that you've got a problem, I would recommend not doing that. I would recommend trying to look for those warning signs that we talked about and see if you have those, then you might want to consider at least evaluating, is there a better way?
Right. That's all right. And you're a good person for anyone listening to reach out to. I know you're on LinkedIn and they'll find you there, Jamie Harris, MHC. So I encourage people to do that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This was a great conversation. Thank you for all your insights. And I hope some of these things resonated with people listening and that you'll get some calls.